The rain fell like tears that day, each drop carrying the weight of a goodbye I wasn't ready to say. I stood between Marcus and Daniel at our mother's graveside, our shoulders touching in a silent promise that we'd weather this storm together, just as we always had. The minister's words dissolved into the gray October air, but I held on to my brother's presence like an anchor in the churning sea of grief. "She's at peace now," Marcus whispered, his voice cracking like autumn leaves beneath our feet. Daniel squeezed my hand, and for that moment, we were children again. 3 souls bound by scraped knees, shared secrets, and the fierce love of a woman who had raised us alone after Dad left when I was 12. I remembered the nights when dinner was little more than rice and hope, how Mom would divide her single portion between us 3, claiming she'd already eaten. Marcus, 2 years younger than me, would always save half his food for Daniel, our baby brother who was born when I was 10. We were a triangle then, each side supporting the others, unbreakable in our solidarity. "At least she got to see us all settled," Daniel said, as we walked away from the freshly turned earth. His wife Sarah linked her arm through his, and I noticed how her manicured nails seemed to glitter even in the somber light. Marcus's girlfriend Jenny stood slightly apart, checking her phone with the practiced disinterest of someone who had never known hunger. The modest house that had sheltered us through childhood felt impossibly empty when we returned. Mom's reading glasses still lay folded on her Bible, marking the page where she'd been reading about forgiveness. Her coffee cup sat unwashed in the sink, a lipstick stain on the rim like a ghost of morning conversations we'd never have again. "We should probably talk about arrangements," Marcus said carefully, his words falling into the silence like stones into still water. "The house, her things, you know." I nodded, though something cold began to coil in my stomach. "Of course, we'll figure it all out together." But even as I spoke those words, I caught the way Sarah's eyes swept over Mom's china cabinet, cataloging, calculating. Jenny had already wandered into the living room, lifting picture frames and commenting on their vintage charm. My brothers, who had once sworn we'd never let anything come between us, said nothing to stop them. That night, alone in the house that had been my refuge for 34 years, I sat in Mom's rocking chair and felt the first hairline crack form in the foundation of our family. It was barely perceptible then, just a whisper of doubt in the darkness. But cracks, I would learn, have a way of growing. The lawyer's office smelled of leather and broken dreams. We sat in high-backed chairs that seemed designed to dwarf human emotion, listening as Mr. Patterson read Mom's will in the detached tone of someone who trafficked in other people's grief. "To my daughter Evelyn, who has been my companion and caregiver these past 5 years, I leave the family home and its contents, knowing she will preserve the memories within its walls." The words hung in the air like a verdict. "To my sons, Marcus and Daniel, I leave the remainder of my estate, divided equally between them." The remainder. $12,000 split 2 ways. Against a house worth perhaps $80,000 in this modest neighborhood, it felt like a slap. I watched my brothers' faces change, saw the precise moment when love calcified into something harder. Marcus's jaw tightened and Daniel's eyes grew distant, already calculating figures I couldn't bear to contemplate. "That's it?" Marcus asked, his voice hollow. $6,000 for each of us while Evelyn gets everything? "The house comes with responsibilities," I said quickly, desperately. "The mortgage payments, the repairs, the mortgage that's almost paid off?" Sarah interrupted, leaning forward in her chair. "The house that's tripled in value since your mother bought it? Those responsibilities?" The weeks that followed blurred together like watercolors in rain. phone calls that started as attempts at understanding and ended in accusations. Marcus, drowning in debt from his failed restaurant, began speaking of the house as if it were stolen goods, not an inheritance of love. Daniel, influenced by Sarah's increasingly strident demands for fairness, grew cold and distant. "You manipulated her," Marcus said during one particularly vicious argument. "All those years playing the devoted daughter, making sure you were the favorite. I stayed because she needed me." The words tore from my throat like splinters. "When Dad left, when you both moved away for college, for jobs, for your new lives, I stayed. I held her hand through chemo. I drove her to every doctor's appointment. I gave up my own apartment, my own independence, to make sure she wasn't alone. And now you're being rewarded for it," Daniel said quietly, his voice carrying a bitterness I'd never heard before. "How convenient." The legal notice arrived on a Tuesday, delivered with the casual brutality of bureaucracy. Marcus was demanding the house be sold and the proceeds divided equally among the three of us. My hands shook as I read the formal language that translated our shattered love into cold legal terms. Partition action, equitable distribution, forced sale. That night, I sat on the porch where Mom used to shell peas and watch us play in the yard. The house felt different now, not like home, but like a museum of memories I might soon lose. I thought about the marks on the kitchen door frame where Mom had measured our heights each birthday, about the loose floorboard in my childhood bedroom where I'd hidden treasures, about the garden where she taught me that love, like flowers, required tending to bloom. The boy who used to save half his dinner for his baby brother was taking me to court. I found the letters while packing Mom's bedroom, tucked beneath her jewelry box, like pressed flowers between the pages of a forgotten book. 3 envelopes, each bearing one of our names in her careful script. The dates showed she'd written them months before she died, when she must have known her time was running short, but her love was not. My own letter spoke of pride and gratitude, of the sacrifices she'd seen me make without complaint, but it was the last paragraph that broke me. "Remember, my darling daughter, that things are just things. They cannot love you back. The house is yours not because you earned it, but because I trust you to fill it with love, not bitterness. If keeping it costs you your brothers, then let it go. Some prices are too high to pay, even for home." Marcus's letter, when I finally worked up the courage to read it, spoke of his generous heart, of how he'd always been the protector, the one who'd shield Daniel from childhood bullies and teenage heartbreak. "Your worth was never measured in dollars in my eyes," Mom had written. "Success is not the absence of failure, but the presence of love in the aftermath." Daniel's letter was the hardest to read. In it, Mom acknowledged his struggle to find his own identity, his need to prove himself worthy of love. "You were never the baby to me," she'd written. "You were the future, the hope that carried us through the darkest days. Don't let anyone convince you that love must be earned or quantified. You are enough, exactly as you are." I made copies and mailed them without explanation, then waited. Marcus arrived first, on a rainy Thursday evening that reminded me of the funeral. He stood on the porch where we'd once carved our initials, his face aged by months of anger and the slow poison of resentment. He looked smaller somehow, diminished by the weight of what we'd broken. "I read it," he said simply, and I saw tears tracking down his cheeks. "I read what she said and God, Evelyn, what have we done?" We sat in the kitchen where Mom had fed us countless meals, where she'd bandaged scraped knees and broken hearts with equal tenderness. Marcus told me about the restaurant, about the crushing debt that had made the house look like salvation instead of sanctuary. He spoke of sleepless nights and the gnawing fear that he was becoming the kind of man our father had been, someone who put money before family. "I didn't want the house because I hated you," he said, his voice breaking. "I wanted it because I was drowning, and I thought it could save me. But Mom was right. Some prices are too high to pay, even for home." Daniel came the next day, Sarah notably absent. He moved through the house like a ghost, revisiting haunts, touching the banister he'd slid down as a child, pausing at the window where he'd watched for Mom's car to come home from work. "Sarah says I'm being weak," he said, standing in the doorway of what had been our shared bedroom. "She says family is just an accident of birth, that we don't owe each other anything we wouldn't owe strangers." "What do you say?" I asked. He was quiet for a long moment, looking at the twin beds where we'd whispered secrets in the dark, where Marcus had told us stories to chase away nightmares, where we'd made plans for adventures that would take us to the ends of the earth and back home again. "He says she's wrong," he whispered. "He says some things matter more than money. He says, I miss my sister." We didn't solve everything that day or the next or even in the weeks that followed. Trust, once broken, doesn't heal overnight. But we began the work of forgiveness, the slow labor of choosing love over ledgers, connection over compensation. I kept the house as Mom had intended, but it became something more than mine. It became ours again, in the ways that matter most. Sunday dinners resumed, tentatively at first, then with growing warmth. Marcus's children learned to climb the same oak tree we had conquered decades before. Daniel started bringing his guitar again, filling the rooms with music as he had when we were young. The financial struggles remained real. Marcus still faced his debts, and I still faced the costs of homeownership. But we faced them together, sharing burdens as we once had shared dreams. We learned that inheritance isn't just about money or property. It's about the values that survive long after the lawyers have gone home. On warm summer evenings, we gather on the porch where Mom used to shell peas and tell stories. The scars remain. We're all more careful with our words now, more aware of how easily love can be misunderstood as selfishness, how quickly greed can masquerade as need. But we're healing, slowly and together. Sometimes I catch myself listening for Mom's voice in the wind through the garden, and I swear I can hear her laughing. She'd told us once that wealth wasn't what you accumulated, but what you were willing to give away. In the end, we learned she was right. The house is beautiful, but it's just wood and stone and memory. The love we chose to preserve, that's the real inheritance, the one that appreciates with time instead of depreciating with use. Material wealth may drive even the closest families into silence and bitterness, but true richness lies in compassion, understanding, and selfless love. Possessions fade, but love, if we choose to nurture it, endures beyond greed, beyond hurt, beyond the temporary madness that makes us forget who we really are to each other. We are not perfect. We probably never will be, but we are family. And that means something more than money can measure, something more valuable than any inheritance written in legal documents. We are the keepers of each other's stories, the witnesses to each other's growth, the soft place to land when the world proves harsh. And that, I think, is what Mom always intended to leave us.